Hi, everybody. I'm with David Seacombe from Aston Beck today, and we're going to speak about a topic that's really quite close to my heart, and that's digital transformation. Today, we can all appreciate we're living in times where there's an accelerated need for digital transformation. Having said that, I think what I can observe is some of the challenges and some of the barriers to overcoming digital transformation still remain quite the same, right? Granted, we need to kind of deal with them and address them in a lot more speedy fashion, given the urgency. However, the barriers and some of the challenges remain quite the same. So, David, thanks for joining the show, and I know we're going to have a great discussion today.
Yeah.
David, there's a bit of a context and a backdrop to our following discussion. Digital transformation is overcome a number of challenges today, both at organization, at leadership. If we think about businesses today, they're effectively built around a couple of pillars, right? And these pillars are, the people, processes, some of the partnerships, and the last but not least, some of the platforms. And I can imagine today there are various challenges across those. When we think about people, we think about partnerships, we think about platforms today, and we think about our processes today. So, David, jumping straight into it, what do you see are some of the challenges that businesses are facing today?
Well, thanks, Javed. Thanks for that introduction. Just as a little bit of context, I'll call myself a management consultant, but over the years, I've worked with a number of organizations, mainly at the C-suite level or C-1 in the larger organizations. And, I've seen a lot of companies and I've seen a lot of ways they work. Some are more successful than others. And it's got me to think, what makes companies successful? And one thing in particular has become particularly relevant to me in the last few years, and that's, and this can be quite a shock, but the old ways of working aren't working. They're no longer effective. Companies need to pivot, not entirely, but probably through 90 degrees to become product-led, to become OpEx-funded, to become cross-functional, to focus on that end-to-end business process flow, to be customer-centric, to deliver value to the customer. And I think that's why organizations, they need to exist to service the customer. If the customer is happy, the customer is buying, the revenue is coming in.
Yeah.
Yes, they can keep the staff happy. Yes, they can keep the shareholders happy. But right now, I put customer value and constant iteration of that value high up on the agenda. Maybe I can build on that a little as well. As I said, I've worked on a number of different initiatives, some of which have been what I call innovative. So a company wants to stay ahead of the game. Sometimes it's transformational. Maybe they've slipped a little bit behind and they need to catch up as the market changes, the consumers change their preferences, or technology needs updating. Or they're sliding a little bit towards what I might call a fire sale. Maybe they need to get the official receiver comes in, or the company has to be sold. Right. And it's always a bit of a shame when that happens. So that's got me to think very strongly about why things like that do happen. And it all boils down to me to the hierarchical command control approach that has pervaded the way businesses have been run, not only in my working lifetime, but I'm sure for 100 years before that as well. Many organizations, I don't think actually these days necessarily recognize their competition. There are asymmetric companies out there who are delivering value to your customers, and the C-suite of those organizations aren't even recognizing that their customers are walking away because somebody else is serving them, or indeed who the competitor is. And that's a shame. And even though we talk about being agile, being flexible, many organizations are far too stuck in that hierarchical, functionally driven, siloed mentality to be able to work effectively cross-functionally.
Yeah. No, David, I think I can relate a little bit to what you've just said, and when we think about ways of working, what I've noticed, at least across some organizations, is they're not very, I would say they're not very upfront and honest around what they're seeing today, and that's partly because maybe they're not necessarily in touch with the landscape, the competitive landscape. So, for example, if we think about technology today, and that's driving change, right? And it's driving change at a pace that sometimes the organization cannot always follow, and particularly leadership and management cannot always keep that to that pace. Not only is it changing very fast, but I think it's changing in very unevenly across the processes. If you think about your value chain, these changes are not happening very evenly across the entire process. So if you think about traditional organizations, they will probably naturally go in and say, how do I go and standardize a process? But it's very hard to standardize a process that is changing unevenly across different areas. In addition to that, I think there's a lot of technologies allowed for a lot of personalization in certain areas. So back to that concept where, again, it's hard to standardize something where you can have personalization, and the marketplace and customers and customer behavior is demanding for that certain personalization. And whereas if you look at maybe your back office and maybe some of the central things, yes, you want to continue standardizing, but probably achieving efficiencies and digitalizing some of that, right? So I think organizations are not always ready to understand that. That's because they haven't necessarily grasped the gaps that they have both internally and externally. So I fully agree with what you're saying, where ways of working, sometimes mindsets between traditional organizations and these digitally natural organizations are a little bit more, there's a difference there, right? Brings on to a good question. How would we go about changing some of these things? So what's the first thing you would probably expect an organization to do? So they're faced with this myriad of challenges. They probably don't know where to start. They're in today's world, or accelerate need to get digitalized. Where do we start?
Well, I think there's multiple facets to that question of how I answer it, and I'll try with a couple. First of all, a lot of the leadership are themselves scared of change, or if they're not scared, they don't necessarily know how to progress change. And like all situations where you've worked your way up through the ranks and you've got to the top, and then you hear a message that says, well, that way of working is no longer relevant, you're going to have to change. That can be a big ask, particularly when they may be looking forward to a little bit of that power that comes with that hierarchical position. But I'd say think about the generation that comes next. You might not have an organisation to pass on. We talk about companies that are too big to fail, but we've lost some big ones recently.
Of course. Yes.
So I think we've all got to be aware of that. But to get a little closer to your question, I think you need to change three things fundamentally. One is the organisational structure. So we've already mentioned it. Instead of being top-down hierarchical, start organising around products, because that's what you actually sell to the marketplace. And really, you need to have a connection between the staff in your internal value chain and the end consumer. So instead of having a business function that thinks, wouldn't this product be a good idea, but doesn't actually know whether that's going to work or not, put together a cross-functional team that takes those stories, those user stories, with let's call it an agile approach, iterates through some engineering effort within an overall architectural framework to create a product, and then take that to the market and see what the market says. And the days are gone when consumers came to you, not to your front door, queued up to buy your product. You have to go to where they are. They use social proof to validate what they buy and to talk about the purchases they've made. You need to be part of that story. We don't want to have multiple different teams. So, a business owner handing off to a business analyst, handing off to a development shop, handing off to an application support team, calling a help desk. Everybody should be an engineer, basically, and have that connection with the end organization. So we need empowered staff. Many people who in an organization, when they're told that you now have that authority to start thinking for yourself, to start making decisions, you're not going to be upbraided if you make a decision and it doesn't quite work. You have to not be afraid of failure. To be successful, we must be able to say, okay, that didn't work. We'll learn from that. We'll try a different approach. And we build small iterations, small increments of change so that we know absolutely whether it works or not. And if it doesn't work, we can roll it back, either code-wise or business process-wise.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-directing teams and internal value chain. So the organizational shift is one, working on the cultural values, the behavioral change needed to instill in people that changing to that function is okay. And maybe some training on how to do that if they're a little unsure. And the third component is technology. When we talk about digital transformation, my sense is that the world thinks, well, if it's digital, must be the tech guy's job. But
Right.
I don't agree. Information is digitized, i.e. changed from analog to digital form. Procedures and roles that operate those procedures are digitalized, so automated and used at scale and distance. But we digitally transform the organization and focus on customer value. Digitization and digitalization are absolutely right for technology and need technology. And the team that is doing the digital transformation needs digital tools such as Slack, for example, to communicate and collaborate. So technology is absolutely part of the equation, but to my mind, it shouldn't drive it. If you're familiar with the work Digital Mastery, there's some interesting stats in there in that anybody can buy tech, but unless you've got the leadership to lay on top of that, you're not actually going to get the value. So what I like to focus on is, yes, I'm very technology aware, but it's the leadership you apply on top of that that actually transforms the organization into what it can be.
Absolutely. David, you talked about being very product-led, and one cannot think about, I'm actually forced to think about, is it being product-led, or do we need to blur it a little bit with being a little bit more platform-driven? And what I mean by a platform, I'm not talking about the architectural platform on the IT side, but more about, the exchange between user A and user B. So yes, we would have a product that's out there and we could sell that product, but it's how do we actually reach the customers where they want to be? And I'm almost thinking about, we need to think about all this from a platform perspective, in addition to being product led, because part of digitalization and becoming a digital organization is creating that platform. So where can you have those connection points, that exchange, and how do you drive that through connecting with the right partners to do that? Do you think today, because it's quite hard to be digital on your own, right? You need to go and partner with the right people who can do this, right? What are your views on that?
Well, thank you for asking. Those who know me know that I have views on many things, and I do indeed on this as well. Some years ago, I remember the phrase, if you want to find a customer, it's search, it's social, or it's marketplace. And to my mind, the platform we're talking about here is almost marketplace.
Yes.
So as an organization, if you create a platform, you are effectively creating an ecosystem for different parties to interact with.
Yes.
So yes, I spoke about product, but that was just practically organizing the internal team to say, if you're in a certain sector, you are going to want to have 1, 2, 3, 4 different markets that cover your products rather that cover your sector.
Right.
But actually, those products should sit on a platform that is architecturally consistent, so that it does make you flexible. It does allow you to change with the times. And crucially, it allows other players to come in and offer their own version of your product. Now, that might sound counterintuitive because if you've worked hard to open up that marketplace, you don't want to give it away. But actually, we're stronger together. And as soon as organizations start having third parties recognizing their market position and wanting to be on their platform, then that attracts more and more customers and everybody wins.
Sure, yeah, and that's the network effect, and I think you definitely create a lot more value through that. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
David, one last question. So, what are the big trends you're seeing in the industry, or some of the watch points that's kind of quite that's taking you, that's really exciting you?
Well, yeah, I suppose the big news at the moment is that we're all working at home. So I love your picture on the wall, Javid. So it's an unchosen reality, isn't it, for the workforce and for the execs who run the company. But we're still likely to be organised in the same teams we were 3 months ago. So we've become virtual workers,
yes,
and we still, in many ways, have the same team leader, the same manager. But that person has now become a virtual manager or a virtual leader. And managing a remote team isn't the same as managing a team that are sitting, a matter of feet away. We're looking at each other now. We can get social cues off each other, but that's quite difficult when you're on a Zoom call. The screen's divided into 9 or 16 or whatever.
Yeah,
You will miss a lot of those signals. So virtual leadership, I think, is a very underrated part of the world. And I've been thinking about that in terms of the skills you need. And in many ways, they are the same skills that I would advocate you need to become a digital master. So the things that you need to do now are what I would have hoped you would have done anyway without the need to be virtual. So, for example, as a virtual leader, you've got to be a master of the tools you use. So many of us have become, Zoom experts, but also, Slack is a wonderful channel. Trello is a great tool. Things that we might have had on our desktop, but not used quite as much. It's now, Confluence and so on. It's a lot easier to use. You just put the effort in to do that.
yeah.
Team oneness. So it's really important that the team still feels a team. So it's empathizing and understanding what's going on in people's lives. You may feel as though you know somebody, but when a child or a cat meows in the background of your team Zoom, or you hear a postman, putting the letters through the box, or something, we're all made up of different parts, aren't we? And some of those don't necessarily come out at work, but they could come out at home. Conversations as well. It's very easy to have a conversation as part of a team, but there are certain things that are said or unsaid. And I still think you need to have that one-to-one follow-up to make sure that everything really is okay. We've got new things to worry about, haven't we? You may be on a furloughed salary of 80%, but your partner may not be. Your partner may be on no money. It may be that you have an elderly parent or a friend who has actually got COVID. There are all sorts of things that need taken care of, but that sort of personal interaction is what we should be doing anyway. You need to be able to motivate people too. I find it quite lucky in that the way I've run my business, Aston Beck is a virtual company by design. So whilst we do go into clients very frequently, we are used to working at home. We have the workplace at home. We have the tools to work very effectively. But we do need to motivate people, because sometimes, at 4 o'clock, maybe all of a sudden the local kids get on the internet connection and the speed drops, and you think, oh, maybe maybe I'll go have a cup of tea, and you get
Yeah.
distracted. So, and then there's the reverse of that, which is you can almost get burnout because you don't know if you have done a good day's work. So you stay at your desk till 7 or 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, being a connector, making sure that people reach out and talk to each other, making sure that you are still connecting your team to the people who need to be connected to, who aren't necessarily in your team. That's a prime skill. Yeah, I mean, those are very simple things, really, but
It sounds like it's bringing the kind of still the human emotion and the humanness into the kind of the virtual reality in their tools, right? So it's important. It sounds like it's important to make sure that that element around the human element, touch is still there, right?
So many people have had,
at the end of the day.
Yeah, so many people have had to adapt to a world that they're not necessarily familiar with, and it's very easy to think, well, I'm okay with it, so everybody else must be.
Yeah.
But I think try to put yourself in their shoes and listen to their hopes and fears. You would do that anyway in an office, but then you can actually see that person, how they react. So, but yeah, everyone's different, aren't they? And that's the glory of a team. We each bring something different, and a really good manager, whether it's virtual or not, makes the most of the people at their disposal.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
David, thank you very much for your time. It's always a great pleasure to hear you, and thanks for sharing your experience and insights here. And mostly thanks for keeping it real.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a pleasure.
Great. Take care.
Thank you.